At the family Christmas gift exchange, I gave my sister a sealed envelope, 3 months of covered rent. She opened it, looked around, and said, "Tries to compensate for the fact that she's not needed by this family." The whole room erupted with laughter, except for me. I just took the envelope back and said, "Useful to know." 10 minutes later, the whole family was shouting, "Please listen to us." The laughter died instantly. Plates stopped clinking. Jenna's smile froze. I pulled on my coat, and suddenly, everyone remembered I had feelings. "Olivia, don't do this," Mom said. "It was a joke." Dad leaned forward. "Come on. She didn't mean anything. Sit down and eat." Then the rest of the room joined in. "Don't ruin Christmas. You're taking it wrong. You know how your sister is." I did know. That was the problem. Jenna was 23. Unemployed, permanently, figuring things out, and every failed plan of hers somehow became a financial emergency for me. What they didn't know was that I had already been standing on the edge for months. I had covered my parents' rent, groceries, utilities, car repairs, and more bounced payments from Jenna than I could count. Jenna talked about courses she never enrolled in, and applications she never sent. Every crisis ended the same way. A message to me, followed by the assumption that I would fix it. Nobody asked whether I was exhausted. Nobody asked whether I had plans for my own money. They just expected me to make the problem disappear. Ethan, my boyfriend, was spending Christmas with his family in Vermont. He had invited me, but I said no because I thought being with my own family mattered. Standing in that living room while they mocked me for giving too much, I realized how ridiculous that choice had been. I told them calmly that this was the last month I would be paying anyone's bills. Starting in January, Jenna could cover her own rent. Mom and Dad could make their own arrangements. I was done being the family bank account. That was when the shouting started. Mom accused me of being dramatic. Dad said I would regret making a permanent decision over a stupid joke. Aunt Sharon said family was supposed to help family. Jenna rolled her eyes and muttered, "Nobody asked you to do all that." I looked at her, then laughed once because there was nothing else left to say. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I walked out, leaving the front door open behind me. Just freezing air against my face, and the realization that something inside me had finally snapped. I thought walking out would be the hard part. It wasn't. The hard part was waking up the next morning to 16 missed calls and a wall of messages explaining why I was somehow the villain. Mom went straight into performance mode. "You embarrassed your sister on Christmas. This family has been through a lot. You've always been the one we can count on." She never mentioned Jenna insulting me, never mentioned the money, never once wrote, "I'm sorry." I ignored the messages until the second day when Mom wrote, "Your father is trying to talk to you like an adult. Don't shut him out." Against my better judgment, I agreed to dinner. Jenna sat at the table staring at her phone. Mom acted like she was hosting Thanksgiving instead of a damage control meeting. Dad made small talk about the stock market, which was almost funny considering I had paid their electric bill for 3 months. Eventually, he put down his fork and started talking about perspective, how money complicates families, how maybe things had gotten out of hand. Then came the real reason I was there. "If you could just help us through February," he said, "we'll have things sorted. I've got a lead on work. Jenna's thinking about taking a course. It's just bad timing." Not an apology. A pitch. I stared at him and understood that none of them had heard a word I said on Christmas. They believed I was angry. They didn't believe I was finished. I told them this had never been about one envelope. For 2 years, I had paid bills, fixed their car, covered Jenna's overdrafts, sent grocery money, and cleaned up emergencies they created because they knew I would rescue them. "And what do I get?" I asked. "I get laughed at for helping." Jenna finally looked up. "Nobody forced you." That sentence erased the last bit of guilt I still had. I stood, told them they had 30 days to learn how to function like adults, and left my spare key on the hallway table. Mom started crying. Dad said I was overreacting. Jenna went back to her phone. A week later, Mom texted, "Rent is due in 5 days. Please send what you can." I opened Venmo, sent exactly $1, and wrote, "More than I can afford." That was the last money I planned to send them. For several days, everything went quiet. I think they expected me to come back with an apology and a check, because that was what I had always done. But this time, I went home to Ethan. We had been living together since November, quietly, without making a big announcement. His family knew me mostly through brief dinners and holiday hellos. After Christmas, that began to change in ways I wasn't prepared for. A few days later, Ethan's father called and asked if I could help him put up shelving in the garage. I almost said no out of habit, because in my family, being asked for help usually meant being used. But he wasn't asking for money. He just needed another pair of hands. So I went. We spent 2 hours in the cold talking about tools and old cars. When we finished, he asked me to stay for dinner. I did. Sitting at that table, with people passing food to me and asking questions they actually waited to hear the answers to, I felt something uncomfortable and unfamiliar. I felt welcome. That one dinner with Ethan's family turned into another invitation 3 nights later, then a weekend lunch, then a New Year's brunch at his cousin's house, where people I barely knew somehow remembered what I did for work and asked follow-up questions, instead of waiting for their turn to talk. Ethan's mother remembered that I had mentioned liking banana bread and made a loaf the next morning. His father started sending me photos of old cars he wanted to restore. Nobody asked me for money. Nobody casually slid a bill across the table or told me about some emergency they assumed I would solve. It should have felt ordinary, but ordinary was exactly what made it unsettling. For years, I had mistaken being needed for being loved. Around Ethan's family, I was slowly learning that the two things were not the same. On New Year's Eve, Ethan and I were sitting near his parents' fireplace, while everyone traded stories about terrible first dates when my phone lit up. Jenna. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got me. Her message said, "Can you send me $400? Our TV finally died and there's a good one on sale. No hello, no apology for Christmas, no acknowledgement that I had cut her off. Just another request." Written with the confidence of someone who still believed my money belonged to her. Ethan watched my expression change. "Everything okay?" he asked. I showed him the message. He stared at it, then quietly handed the phone back. I opened Venmo and sent Jenna exactly $1. Caption: "Should be plenty." She never replied. I put my phone face down and went back to the conversation. By the second week of January, the silence from my family became almost eerie. No calls, no guilt messages, no surprise requests. I had spent so long expecting my phone to vibrate with someone else's crisis that peace felt suspicious. Then, one freezing evening, around 8, someone knocked on our apartment door. I opened it and found Dad standing there in a thin windbreaker, his jaw tight and his face older than I remembered. He hadn't called. He hadn't asked whether it was a good time. He simply walked past me as soon as the door opened, as though some part of him still believed he had the right to enter my life whenever he wanted. Ethan was out helping his brother that night, which was probably for the best. Dad stood in the center of the living room without taking off his coat. "I need to talk to you about something serious," he said. The seriousness turned out to have a number attached to it. $8,000. My parents were 2 months behind on the mortgage. Calls from the lender had become notices, and that morning they had found another warning taped to the door. Dad said they needed $8,000 immediately to bring the account current and stop things from escalating. Then came the familiar explanations. His back was still bothering him. The disability paperwork was moving slowly. The job lead hadn't worked out. Jenna was going through something, but supposedly intended to get herself together soon. I listened until he ran out of excuses, then asked, "Where is Jenna right now?" Dad looked away. "At home." "Doing what?" He hesitated. "Playing one of those games, probably." I nodded. That answer told me everything. Dad's voice softened after that. "Look, Olivia, I know we haven't always shown it, but we appreciate what you've done. If we lose the house, your mother won't handle it well. I told him I believed that. I also told him I wasn't giving them the money. Not $8,000. Not $800. Not $8. His face changed, as if I had suddenly started speaking another language. So that's it? He asked. You're going to stand there and watch your family drown? I felt something inside me go strangely calm. I'm not watching anyone drown, I said. I've been keeping everyone above water while none of you bothered learning how to swim. He stared at me for several seconds, then shook his head. I should have known you'd turn your back when things got hard. That sentence removed whatever sympathy I still had. I opened the door. You need to leave. The next morning, Mom created a family group message explaining that they were in a temporary crisis and asking relatives to help save the house. She wrote about unexpected hardship, bad luck, and family pulling together. She did not mention years of unpaid bills. She did not mention Jenna refusing to work. She did not mention that I had already spent 2 years covering expenses. Aunts and cousins responded with small offers, $100 here, $200 there, along with prayers and heart emojis. I stayed silent. 3 days later, Jenna finally texted me directly. She said she was selling her gaming PC and trying to raise money. Then she asked if I could cover whatever amount remained. You'll get it back, she promised. I answered with one word. No. Her response came almost instantly. So you're actually going to let Mom and Dad lose the house? Wow. I didn't reply. That weekend, Ethan and I attended his cousin's birthday dinner. Halfway through the evening, his mother pulled me aside while everyone else was in the dining room. You know we're glad you're here, right? She said. I thought she meant the party, so I smiled and said yes. She shook her head. No, I mean with Ethan. With us. You're good for him, and we're happy to have you around. I had no clever answer. No sarcastic shield. I just nodded, because my throat had tightened unexpectedly. Later that night, I checked my phone and saw another message from Mom. This time it was a link to a fundraiser with a photograph of the house where I grew up. The description talked about hardship and trying to protect a beloved family home. The goal was $8,000. I read it twice, then closed it. February arrived. The fundraiser stalled well below its goal. I checked once out of curiosity and saw messages from old neighbors and people my mother had worked with years ago. Everyone wished them luck. Nobody asked why their adult daughter Jenna was still sitting at home waiting for someone else to solve the crisis. Somehow, the house did not immediately disappear from beneath them. Maybe an aunt stepped in. Maybe Dad negotiated with the lender. Maybe someone borrowed money. I never asked. That was another change I had not expected. I was beginning to understand that knowing every detail of their disasters was what kept pulling me back into them. There were still attempts to reach me. One evening, an unknown number sent, "Saw you with Ethan's family. Looks like you replaced us pretty fast." I deleted it without answering. Another week, Mom tried a softer approach and asked if I could send a few $100s toward a replacement television because Jenna was really down lately and having something to watch would cheer her up. I stared at the message for a long time. Not because I was considering it, but because I finally saw how absurd the pattern had become. Their mortgage had nearly collapsed. They had begged relatives for money, and somehow a new television had already become an emergency. I sent $1. Caption: Tell Jenna to read a book. After that, the silence returned, but this time it didn't feel threatening. It felt earned. Meanwhile, Ethan's family kept drawing me into their ordinary lives. His father asked me to help with the grill at a Sunday cookout and handed me the tongs without ceremony. His mother started assigning me dishes to bring to gatherings as though I had always been part of the rotation. One of Ethan's younger cousins asked if I would teach him to drive stick when summer came. I kept waiting for the hidden price of all that kindness, but none appeared. Standing beside Ethan one afternoon, flipping burgers while his father argued with someone about baseball, and his mother shouted from the patio that we were burning the onions, I realized something that frightened me more than the fights with my own family ever had. I was happy. Not relieved, not distracted, actually happy. And for the first time, I began to wonder whether cutting my family off had not destroyed my life at all. Maybe it had finally made room for one. By March, the silence from my family had hardened into something permanent. It wasn't exactly a feud anymore because feuds required both sides to keep fighting, and I had stopped participating. There were no more calls from Dad, no passive-aggressive messages from Mom, no sarcastic demands from Jenna. For the first time in years, I could look at my phone without wondering whose emergency was about to become my responsibility. Ethan and I settled into a routine that would have seemed painfully ordinary to anyone else. He left stupid notes on the refrigerator reminding me to buy milk. I packed his lunch when he had early meetings. On Saturdays, we wandered through the farmer's market, arguing over which apples tasted better, then went home and cooked something neither of us really knew how to make. There were no dramatic declarations, no grand gestures, just consistency. And I was beginning to understand that consistency could feel more intimate than being desperately needed. The biggest adjustment was Ethan's family. His mother had apparently decided I was now part of the logistics department. One Sunday, she asked us to arrive early for a cousin's baby shower, and the moment I stepped inside, she handed me a handwritten list. Pick up ice. Move folding chairs. Check whether the bakery had delivered the cake. Find Ethan's uncle, because nobody trusted him to remember where he parked. I looked at the list, laughed, and started working through it. Halfway through the afternoon, I noticed Ethan's father watching me from across the patio. For a second, an old instinct kicked in, and I wondered whether I had done something wrong. After everyone left, while we were stacking chairs, he finally said, "You handle yourself well." I looked at him, confused. He shrugged. "I've seen people fold under a lot less than what you've dealt with." He didn't explain how much Ethan had told him. He didn't need to. There was no pity in his voice, only respect, and somehow that was harder to accept. That night I found myself scrolling through old messages from my family. There were hundreds of them. Rent reminders, utility screenshots, Jenna asking for $20, then $50, then $300. Mom saying things like, "You know we wouldn't ask if we had another choice," even though somehow they never seemed interested in creating another choice. Dad sending pictures of car repair estimates with nothing more than, "Can you handle this?" I kept scrolling until I reached Christmas. Then I realized I wasn't looking because I missed them. I was studying evidence from a life I no longer lived. I deleted the entire thread. A few weeks later, Ethan casually mentioned that his cousin Julia had invited us to her lake house for the weekend. I laughed because Julia had forgotten my name the first 3 times we met. Ethan grinned. "Apparently you're Olivia who fixed the grill now. You've been promoted." The weekend sounded simple enough, and at first it was. There were drinks on the deck, too much food, card games, and arguments about whose turn it was to clean up. Then Julia's husband, Brian, asked if I could walk down toward the dock with him because he wanted to discuss something privately. My stomach tightened immediately. Private conversations had rarely meant anything good in my family. Brian worked at a mid-sized technology firm, and they were looking for a project manager with an IT background. He knew from Ethan that I had spent years coordinating technical teams, solving problems, and keeping complicated projects from falling apart. "You're weirdly hard to find online," he said. "Your LinkedIn looks abandoned." I laughed and told him I hated networking. "Good," he said. "Most people who are great at networking are exhausting." Then he became serious. "I've watched you around this family. You're dependable, you listen, and when something goes wrong, you don't make everyone else panic. Those things matter." We talked for nearly an hour. By the time we walked back toward the house, he had basically offered me an interview that sounded suspiciously like a job offer. The position paid more than my current job, involved less travel, and offered more flexibility. It should have been an easy decision. Instead, the next morning Ethan found me sitting alone on the dock staring across the water. "You look like somebody told you the lake belongs to you, and now you're trying to figure out the taxes," he joked. I told him about Brian's offer. Ethan smiled immediately. "That's great." I didn't smile back. I admitted that everything happening lately felt strangely undeserved. His family accepting me, the peace, the job opportunity. It felt as though I had accidentally walked into somebody else's life. Ethan sat beside me and nudged my shoulder. Or maybe you spent so long around people who made you earn every scrap of affection that normal kindness feels suspicious. I didn't have an answer to that. The following week, Mom called for the first time in months. I watched the phone ring until it stopped. 30 seconds later, it rang again. Then came a text. "Can we talk? Nothing bad, just talk." For one dangerous second, I felt the familiar pull to call her back, smooth everything over, and make the discomfort disappear. Instead, I forwarded the screenshot to Ethan. His response was simple. "Your life is peaceful now. Protect that." So I did. I never called her. By April, I had accepted Brian's offer. Better salary, better schedule, less stress. When Ethan's parents heard, they invited us over for dinner. His father made ribs and opened a bottle of wine he normally saved for holidays. Halfway through the meal, he lifted his glass. "To Olivia," he said, "for knowing which fights are worth staying in and which ones are worth walking away from." Everyone raised their glasses. Nobody turned it into a joke. Nobody followed the toast by asking me for something. I said thank you, and for once thank you was allowed to be the end of the transaction. That night, Mom left a voicemail. "Your cousin told me about the new job. I'm glad you're doing well. I hope you're happy. We're still here if you ever want to come back. Come back." The words bothered me more than anger would have. She made it sound as if I had simply wandered away, as if Christmas had been some misunderstanding instead of the moment I finally saw our family clearly. There was still no apology, no acknowledgement, nothing about Jenna, nothing about everything I had carried. I deleted the voicemail. Then May arrived, and Jenna proved exactly how little had changed. She sent me a screenshot of a television listed for $399. Underneath it, she wrote, "You could help. 400 isn't a lot to someone like you." I stared at the message and waited for anger. Nothing came. No resentment, no sadness, just exhaustion so old it had finally burned itself out. I sent her $1. Caption: "Still too much." Jenna never replied. That became the last message I ever received from her. That weekend, Ethan and I returned to the lake house alone. He brought 2 books. I brought charcoal, steaks, and enough snacks for a small army. We swam until the water became too cold, grilled dinner, played cards badly, and sat beside the fire after dark. Ethan had a blanket over his legs, and his hair was still damp when he suddenly asked, "Do you miss them?" I took longer to answer than I expected. Finally, I said, "I miss who I thought they might become. I miss the family I kept hoping they would eventually be. But I don't think I miss the people they actually were." Ethan nodded. That makes sense. There was no speech about forgiveness, no pressure to reconnect. He just understood. After he went inside, I stayed beside the dying fire with my phone in my hand. I deleted Mom's number, then Dad's, then Jenna's. I erased old threads, archived emails, and every remaining doorway I had kept open, because some part of me still imagined they might one day walk through it carrying an apology. When I finally went inside, Ethan was half asleep. "Everything okay?" he murmured. I kissed his forehead. "Yeah," I said. "Everything's finally okay." A few months later, Ethan and I were having a casual Sunday lunch at his parents' house when his mother disappeared inside and returned carrying a small cardboard box. "We found this while cleaning the attic," she said. "It's nothing expensive." Inside was an old Polaroid from my first Thanksgiving with their family. I was standing beside Ethan with a paper plate piled ridiculously high with food, caught halfway through a bite. Ethan was pointing at something outside the frame, laughing so hard his eyes were nearly closed. I barely remembered anyone taking the picture. His mother touched the edge of the photograph and said, "We kept that one because that was the day we realized you fit here." I didn't know what to say. For years, I had transferred money, paid bills, solved emergencies, and exhausted myself trying to prove I deserved a place inside my own family. Yet this woman had saved an ordinary photograph of me simply because she remembered the moment I became part of hers. The picture sits on a shelf in our living room now, beside a plant Ethan insists is alive even though I remain unconvinced. And whenever I look at it, I remember the strangest lesson Christmas ever taught me. Sometimes the biggest change isn't revenge. Losing a house, cutting people off, or sending someone one final dollar. Sometimes it's realizing that the people who truly value you don't need you to buy your place at their table. They simply pull out a chair.